Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Darkman, the original film from 1990. So, the app will probably tell you to go into, or Google will probably tell you, like, hey, watch this movie on Play-Doh, or whatever app that usually it's to actually be on. I've been using this app lately and I switched from what I've been using normally. There's this app that is to be called Yes Movies, and I think it's called Yes Movies and Shows. But like, if you probably do Yes Movies, you'll probably have this come up fairly quickly, I hope. Or you could probably go into a app called Fox HD Movies. That app kind of has like a slew of everything, like the other app that I mentioned does. But you could go in and watch this Sam Raimi film, Darkman, or really just people that have usually been involved in a lot of Sam Raimi movies being involved in this one. So going going towards this film, I kind of really do enjoy it. There's some goofy kind of things that go along with this movie, where you have Liam Neeson's character who is to supposedly perfect a synthetic skin to seemingly apply upon his face so that way he can basically look like his villains. And that kind of creates a interesting bout of story where we have Westlake's character who is to try to get revenge on all these people who had basically caused him to have this face that had been heavily scarred, and he has basically lost the ability to seemingly feel like absolutely this guy cannot like seemingly feel pain to the point of him getting stabbed or him having his hand get burnt and he can't tell the difference. Going, I guess, because they might have like severed a nerve or nerves that eventually just prevent this guy from feeling anything. So going into this film, like, I like its like dark, edgy part of here, where we have Peyton himself just kind of mentioned that he is to now just be a freak, and that's always what he'll end up being, because he can't find the perfect uh, synthetic skin that's going to go over 99 minutes. Kind of like the DeLorean going over 80 miles an hour and then time travels. But it seems that Peyton, the only way or ability that he can go past the 99-minute marker is to eventually only come out at night or only have a face out at night, which it seems that he has an inability to ever actually have a faced masked thing that is to basically be out at night. So going into this film, I thought it was really interesting. Like, the villain part of it maybe isn't the best, or it kind of feels like, oh, we kind of can tell where this is going. But I don't know, I just kind of really enjoyed it. There was something about it that's just kind of like, it kind of reminded me of the Alec Baldwin movie, like The Shadow from like DC, when they did that. Like, it has this kind of old fashioned kind of story to it, and I think that's what made me clung on to this most. Is it just kind of felt old fashioned, regardless of what time it is or what time period it came from. It kind of had that kind of uh, really just approach of uh, like a man wanting to win back his ability to be seen and not to be called disfigured or not to be called a monster or so on and so forth. So, yeah, I just really enjoyed this movie. It was really like a fun, like, revenge film, but it was also really interesting when eventually we started to escalate Peyton's like anger and how he would start to lose control and almost like snap a guy's fingers and like all kinds of interesting things to eventually see where this character can go when eventually he is to be uh, really upset, because supposedly the doctor is to mention to us that all that is really left of this man is really just his emotions. So, yeah. So let's go into that double five time territory, because I think it's that coveted time yet again to go into spoiler time, about time to go into spoilers. What happened there? I had a brain fart of how to do my normal spoiler thing that I've done a billion times over. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. There we go. I had a brain fart in the middle of my normal. That's weird. Anyways, so let's go into this. So, uh, really, just the beginning of all this really just has to go. Like, this whole movie is to be tied by one freaking document, which is to be bizarrely this thing called the Belisarium Memorandum. Wow. So yeah, a whole document of a thing is to tie into this. Supposedly it's a document, they call it a memo, they call it any number of things, but still, it's a memorandum. The Belisarius memorandum. Good God, say that like just 3 times faster. It'd be pretty hard. Belisarium memorandum. Anyways, so going into this very beginning of the movie, we have both Peyton Westlake and we have his assistant that I probably won't have the name of. Yakatito, could that be it? Probably not. We have Peyton, who is to eventually put together this synthetic skin to basically be worn as a mask. The only problem is that this synthetic skin only lasts for 9 minutes and then it completely dissolves. It seems like they can't figure out what the magical thing to do to stop this thing from fizzing out. But then all of a sudden the power is to go out, and then all of a sudden Peyton is to realize, him and his assistant, that them taking the light and turning it out can get this skin past the 99-minute barrier. So, and even more so. So they're like, oh my god, like the skin is like a photosynthesis or photogenic or whatever, or something like that, where like it just can't deal with the light. So it's almost kind of like Hollow Man, where in the Kevin Bacon movie Hollow Man, like basically Kevin Bacon like is to have light consistently hit into his eyes, because his eyes his eyelids are basically see-through, so Kevin Bacon can basically like see everything, like light and what, so he has to like really just do everything in the dark, because like his eyes just have had to adjust to consistent light going into them. So the very beginning of this movie is to have a guy named Durant who is to have a number of thugs at his leisure, who eventually will become the vengeance part of this film for the Darkman, or Darkman. So Durant is to eventually go to meet another gangster called Eddie Black, and it seems that Eddie Black is to... It seems like this is a territorial fight where it seems like Eddie Brand is like, nobody's going to be stealing anything from me. It's like, oh yeah, really? Well, we're just going to kill all of you guys off then. Because one guy who is to supposedly have a prosthetic leg, not so prosthetic and not so without bullets within prosthetic leg, because this is going to all of a sudden have a prosthetic gun that they're just going to continue to use for a bulk of this movie for whatever reason after the first thing. Because I could get it when they used it in the very beginning of this movie, but then they just continue to use it for whatever reason, to where we just consistently have one guy who's hopping throughout this whole movie. And I'm just like, why? Especially when we get to the Peyton part where I'm like, okay, why is this guy hopping now? I guess it's just his shtick or his gimmick. But going on. So because Durant was picked clean out of all of his brass rings and all kinds of things to use as a weapon, or brass knuckles, not brass rings, like disposed of. So Durant goes in there. They think that he has no bullets, but then eventually the prosthetic leg becomes a gun. And so all of a sudden there's a huge fight out where everybody starts grabbing guns, and it's a race to basically wipe the face off of any number of these goons. Where Duran is kind of shooting a bunch of guys that are kind of driving their way in here bizarrely. Um, but yeah, so Eddie Black's goons are to be all killed out, all decked out. So that kind of is to like prove like he's going to be the villain of this movie. So pushing us on. So eventually we have a guy named Lewis Stack Jr. who is to have Julie come to his office and mention about the memorandum and mention how like it was a memo that probably wasn't to supposedly be sent out, but I guess it ended up getting sent out. So Julie is to have this on her, and eventually we have Lewis Stack Jr., who is to want to get this memo back. And because eventually Julie is to find out that it seems that there is some shenanigans going on with his company, that there might be some embezzling stuff going on, or there might just be some wrongdoing going on here. And Lewis Stacks Jr. kind of confesses to that, but also tells her that's not something that she should have actually seen, and so on and so forth. So the whole movie just becomes a chase to get this whole memorandum thing, and I'm just like, okay, sure. So, like, it's just a whole reason to just do an action movie or have some kind of Crow-like situation where someone's going to die because of certain documents. So Julie is trying to protect herself by leaving this within Peyton's hands, because Julie is to be romantically involved with Peyton, and really we bizarrely have this opening moment here when Julie is to stop talking with her boss and go to Peyton's place, and Peyton is going over this projection of old photos of him, like talking about kind of better days or like whatever days. So all of a sudden that eventually leads to having Peyton and Julie like going at it, which you don't really see anything. Funny enough, we had Peyton who was to mention to Julie how like she always has to wear like difficult outfits for him to take off. So eventually, so what ends up happening out of all this is Durant is to desperately want to go and find this document, and so he is going to make his way to Peyton's office to try to squeeze information out of Peyton instead of really going directly to Julie, which I just find weird. So anyways, so what ends up happening is Durant is to go and surround Peyton's office, and so they end up putting a plastic bag over his assistant, and Peyton, who had a thing fallen on top of him, like some kind of God, what is the correct word? Device. Let's just say device. That was stupid. And so Peyton has this thing just dropped on him. he can't really move. So Peyton is to tell them like, hey, like let him breathe. And so we have Durant who's just like, well, yeah, go ahead, let him breathe. So that means that uh, we have Ted Raimi, good God, Ted Raimi, who I've seen in a number of things. So the name actually is familiar. He's Ash versus Evil Dead, Xena, Warrior Princess, Spider-Man movies, the Tobey Maguire ones. I've seen him in a number of things, but like the name usually escapes me. He actually plays Rick in this film. He ends up shooting Peyton's assistant into this movie. So the next thing that they end up doing is they end up grabbing Peyton and wanting to dump him into this liquid container of sorts, which Peyton is to go and grab these sides of this container, which electrifies the crap out of him, which burns his hands. And so once Peyton is to finally let go of that, they dunk him into this pink container much more to basically try to drown him. Right after that, what they end up doing is they end up finding the document that has a coffee stain on it. And they're like, yep, we got it right here, so let's go on. So right after that, they end up deciding to take this lighter and this little dipping device, this little weird dipping toy where it kind of like does this back and forth motion, this like pendulum toy of sorts, and they open up this flammable container. So they end up eventually just going ahead and scampering off to have this thing eventually hit this lighter, which douses this whole thing. All of a sudden, we just see Peyton's character getting shot out into the sky and then falling into the water. So what eventually is to happen is that this hospital is to scoop up Peyton and to eventually just put bandages all over his face, mummify him basically, because they pretty much have to. Like, his entire body is so severely scarred that they have to like mummify his basically entire body. So this doctor is to mention that all is left is this guy's emotions and that there's going to be a lot of therapy to be done here. And bizarrely, they have him this like circular like thing just going around and round, and as he's like attached attached to this device, because eventually he needs to be restrained, because like his base emotions are the only thing really left. So eventually he's going to be really angry and become a rage monster eventually. But so they won't quite understand when he'll wake up, like what kind of person they're going to get. But so this doctor ends up doing these weird, absurd things, like hitting him in the face with this like poker, and then like stabbing him with this needle. And like, yeah, he doesn't feel a thing. Like, anybody else want to come on in and just stab away? Anyone else just want to just like get a huge knife? Just get a gun, like just like torch him a little. It'll be a fun time. No, it won't. Leave this guy alone. He's been through enough. Good God. Yeah, I guess they had like severed nerve endings or something like that during the whole like him getting burnt so badly. I don't know if there's actually like a whole thing about that where there's a whole nerve ending thing that's going on here. But let me pause here for a second. Let me do a reset. All right. So, of course, Peyton is to eventually escape this hospital and eventually go upon his own, decide to eventually find some seemingly scientific place for him to work, but it's an abandoned, I guess, like boiler room place, looks like, where eventually he is to find some cat, and this cat is like hate his guts for whatever reason. Every time Darkman is to basically like, hey kitty, and like, like the cat hates him. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the cat's backstory of hating Darkman is, but maybe it's just a weird, goofy thing. So immediately we have Peyton, who is to be desperately wanting to start to go after, of course, some of these people. And so really what he ends up doing and what he ends up finding out is that he can still go and seemingly replicate anyone's face, and so like face and hands. So, and Peyton can also replicate his own like face from before, but it seems like there was a photo that he had that wasn't complete, and then eventually he ends up realizing to take a copy of one side and putting it on the other and doing the same for both parts of his face so he can complete the whole face, but it was going to take a significant amount of time to be able to get the picture perfect. So Peyton's first thing is to eventually go after this guy named Rick, because I want to get this correct. So what is to happen is Rick is to go out into this dark alley, and Peyton is to grab Rick and take him down into this sewer, open up this manhole, lift him up to where all this like oncoming traffic is almost going to hit Rick, and Rick is to tell the Darkman that he doesn't know anything, and Peyton is like, well, just imagine that you did. Like, basically saying, like, you're going to die anyways for the heinous act that you did. So, we just obviously see that Rick is to get brutally ran over, or what we are assumed to be ran over, because we just see this car coming into what would, I guess, be Rick's face. So, like, I guess his head got pretty crushed brutally. So, that is to lead us to have Darkman go and find where Polly is to live, and he ends up chloroforming Polly, and then he ends up going to this one money drop with these two other guys, one to be, I believe, let's not get into specifics. These two other goons that are with Durant, so they're to mention that he is to basically take the money, and he's like, okay, great, like I'll do this. Like, wait a minute. So Darkman is now Polly, and so Polly goes, who is Darkman, goes to this spot to pick up the money, and what Darkman ends up doing with the money is actually just framing Polly to be killed off, so that way, one, they know exactly where Rick is, because supposedly Durant is to go and see this thing of luggage that is to have these 2 tickets to Rio for Polly and for Rick to have these guys be none the wiser. And so Durant ends up killing Polly himself, tossing him out a window. So I'm like, oh my god. So this is like the Punisher movie, the original Punisher movie, not the Warzone or not the Netflix show. Like, it's the John Travolta Punisher movie where Durant is to kill his own man at one part of this film, because Darkman is to pretty much take care of the rest. So, so eventually what is to happen here is eventually Darkman is to also perfect how to sound like people. And so eventually we have this one spot uh, where Darkman is to hear the conversation that is going on in Durant's house. And so Darkman goes and gets a mask of Durant and has himself go and hold up this one gas station, and you could tell that he's in the gas station camera, just going, "Yes, I'm Durant," like like obviously trying to get this guy to go to prison for this crime that he didn't actually do. So all of a sudden Durant is to go to prison, and that leads Darkman to actually become Durant. And so Durant is now going to this this place where there is to be this thug of a guy named Hung Fat, who they're kind of haggling over money. And by then, like Durant's like face for the Darkman is right around 90 minutes. So it's like, hey man, quicken this up. So Durant is to like cut this cigar because Durant likes to use things with this cigarette cutter. He likes to cut people's fingers all the time and do these horrific things. So Durant is to have this small cigar and say, by the time that this cigar is to be done, like, you better give me my money. And he is to also like put a match over his hand to showcase it's like, hey, like, I'm serious about this. So Hung Fat is like, okay, I'll get your money. So eventually what ends up happening is Durant ends up showing to where this whole Hung Fat negotiation is. And so all of a sudden, Darkman and Durant are to be in this escalator. And so now, like, the what is left of his goons don't really understand who is who. Excuse me. And so both Durant and Darkman, who is Durant, are kind of like just rustling it out. And so neither one of his goons know who Durant is, and it seems like either one of them are perfectly saying words and stuff like that. So eventually, Darkman is to run off with the money, like kind of take Durant down and then run off the money. And then that's when the goons finally realize that this is the real Durant. So they start running off to try to kill off Darkman. And so eventually Durant or Darkman ends up running off with the money. And so really that just gives like Durant just this like, God, we have like no money, like we have nothing on us, like we're just starting to bleed dry here. So also we have a moment where Julie was to be at the spot where Darkman's office had basically exploded. So once that was to happen, we transitioned Julie from being in front of that office where Peyton was to be at to eventually being at supposedly Peyton's funeral, which I don't know how exactly they did that because they must have just buried nothing because they couldn't identify Peyton's body, I guess. So Peyton is to supposedly move on. Whoops, I just dropped my phone. Let me pause here for a second. So Julie is to almost move on. It seems like she is to end up with Louis Stark Jr., who is to try and like kind of like go to a place to just kind of dance with her and like try and comfort her because no one else is gonna like do that. So but Julie still is not exactly won over by Lewis or Stark or Strack. Strack? I almost want to say Stark a lot because there's this one part where we have like Strack Industries where I'm like, God, this is like the evil Iron Man here. But yeah, so going further on, so eventually we have here where we have Julie eventually finding out because Strack was to mention to Julie that Durant is technically a competitor of Strack, and that Durant will want that document as much as Strack will. But eventually, that is all just really a lie because Julie is to eventually figure out that Strack and Durant are one and the same. But we'll get there. So Peyton is to also come back into Julie's life and to be uh, Peyton, normal Peyton yet again, but only Peyton for 99 minutes because I guess he can't do anything beyond that because he can't do anything seemingly at night. So Peyton is to appear basically at his own grave to tell Julie that he's still alive. And then so Julie ends up hugging him, and Peyton is to tell her the whole story about everything that happened. So Julie is to consistently say, well, I want more than what we have here. And Peyton's like, well, I still need to go back to the hospital. There's still things that I need to perfect, aka my synthetic skin, for me to be able to have you see me forever. And so eventually, both Peyton and Julie are to go off to this carnival where they are to just kind of play games, and all of a sudden there is this freak show where all of a sudden we see this one guy who's to kind of be like supposedly deformed, but I don't know if I buy it. So so all of a sudden that has Peyton almost wanting to tell Julie the truth, but then once Peyton ends up seeing this freak show, he's like, maybe not, maybe I shouldn't say anything. Uh, because Peyton honestly wants to tell her the truth, and then but eventually he's like, oh hey, how about we just go off and we just like, I'll win you a pink elephant. So weirdly, like Peyton has this like delivery, which I don't know if this is like a fastball or a chain, what kind of like pitch delivery, I don't know. Like what I know about baseball. Uh so yeah, so Peyton fires one in, misses the wall, fires one in, misses, and then the third one, he ends up going right into the cans, knocking all of them down. And so Peyton is to ask the guy, well, like, I'll take the pink elephant. That's what I wanted anyways. So the guy is just like, well, I'm sorry, dude, but you're over the line. He's like, what are you talking about? If anything, I was like far like behind the line. He's like, no, man, sorry. It's like, and then Peyton just like continues to bargain with this guy to like, yeah, I was on the like the guy's like, dude, were you listening to me? Like, come on, like you weren't. So eventually Peyton is to get so angry that he just breaks the fingers of this guy and is like, give me the pink elephant. So like he just chucks this guy, smacking him like past all of his props and all that stuff to just like be like through this wall basically. So Peyton grabs the elephant, gives it to Julie. Julie doesn't want it, so eventually we all of a sudden see that Peyton is to start to lose his face. His face is to start to bubble because it's getting close to that 99-minute mark, and plus also maybe the frustration of Peyton was to escalate this thing also. I'm not quite sure. So, because I didn't see the counter thing that he always has to go ahead and look at and say, oh, we're almost at 90 minutes now. So, Peyton is to run off and is to go back to his boiler room hideout of sorts. I don't know the actual name of it because I don't know Dark Man comics or whichever that well. So Darkman is to go and run off to his hideout, and Julie is to follow him and is to eventually figure out that uh, that one, where he's hiding out, two, that he was to have a mask upon his face, and then the mask is to all of a sudden dissolve, and she's like, "Ew, boogers, boogers." Your face was boogers this whole time? Why didn't you tell me your face was boogers? I kissed you. No. I just went with a joke with that. So, Julie is to, like, said, like, why didn't you tell me, like, your face? Like, you don't have a face. Like, you should have said something. You could have told me the whole thing. And so we just have Peyton, who sits off to the side. He's like hiding in the shadows, just like, no. Because he probably would have hated all of this. This grill. It's scary. That's why I would have bandages and call myself a God, he called himself like, there was this one spot where eventually he couldn't figure out how to be able to perfect the synthetic skin. So he does this like song and dance for his cat, and he's like, "Hey, I'll wear a hat. I'm a freak. I'm a freak." Like, he's a freak show. Like $5, everybody. He's a freak show. And it's like, okay, all right. Kind of Darkman losing his mind a little bit. He's going a little bananas. So, but eventually that pushes us to eventually having Durant and his men eventually follow where Julie is to consistently go. And all of a sudden, Julie is to go back to Darkman's lair. And that is, of course, when Durant and his men decide to pounce. That they are going into Darkman's headquarters to try and take him down, shoot him out, or whatever. I think I'm hoping I've got almost everything covered because I feel like I feel like there's a part somewhere where I've kind of just like, oh, but you forgot this part. Okay, great. I'll probably just be like, oh no, like that's gonna kick me in the head for the whole entire time or whatever. It's gonna like bother me that it's like, I forgot something. I think I did. Probably not. Anyways, so that is where we kind of handle most of Durant's men in this situation, where we have a spot where there is to be one guy who is to supposedly have one of the other goons' faces on, and so this goon immediately thinks, I think his name is Smiley, that he is to be the Darkman, so he shoots one of his goons to all of a sudden take this guy's face off to realize that Darkman is underneath, so he's like, but then eventually he realizes that there's still another mask underneath, and so takes that one off to find out that it's his own his own gang member. And so all of a sudden Darkman is to actually wear this Smiley guy's face, and all of a sudden Darkman is to basically punch this guy to death. And so that eventually leads to having Durant, who is on this helicopter. So Darkman is to go and hook himself onto this helicopter, and eventually what ends up happening is Durant is like, oh, we can try to like slice and dice him up, or we can try to get rid of him. Like they end up getting kind of close to another helicopter, but they kind of miss him to get all sliced and diced. So eventually they start like dropping lower, and Darkman is to quickly just latch this little line that he's on from this helicopter onto the semi truck, and so all of a sudden this helicopter is forced to go crashing into this bridge where this semi is going into because he's going into this tunnel. So this helicopter ends up smashing into this bridge that was tunnel, and so that basically is to naturally assume that Durant is going to be dead. Guarantee, unless. So Durant is to appear and is to appear by this brand new building that is going to have Strack go and have Julie and this other thug just kind of dangling with these pillars. So we have bizarrely also Durant weirdly had these like collection of fingers, and so I can probably understand like why he was chopping off all those people's fingers, or why Durant needed to get the finger of that assistant. So I guess that just must be his thing to collect all these fingers. So I guess that makes a lot of sense, right? So uh, Strack's strategy is to supposedly build this whole brand new city for everyone. And like he has this whole model, and he's like it's basically like RoboCop all over again, where they always have this plan of this like, but what if we built all these buildings and like it just made for a better society and everyone could just live way better than how they could have, and so on and so forth. There's always that bizarrish plan that if you just built a bunch of skyscraper buildings and made the city look a little bit better, that everyone will want to come back to it weirdly. I don't know what goofy strategy like all these villains always have. Uh but like that seems to be like a plan of that like of Strack had, where he just wanted to build all these buildings for some bizarre reason. So Durant is to make his way with Strack and Julie, and they're dancing all over these pillars. So Strack is to mention about Durant's kids, and Durant is to mention that his kids are fine, and Strack is like, ha ha ha, you don't have any kids, Durant, so you're Darkman. So Strack goes and peels off the mask of Durant to see that it's Darkman, and so now Strack is like, hey man, no wonder that she went after me and was wanting to be with me because she didn't want to be with a freak show like you. So like Strack just keeps calling Darkman a freak, and so they keep doing this bizarrish balancing act with all these pillars. They keep going from place to place while the villain is to have his maniacal, like condescending freaking dialogue of words. So eventually, Darkman is to seemingly disappear, and then all of a sudden, Strack is like, "Okay, where is Darkman?" All of a sudden, Darkman like comes from out of the sky and jumps onto Strack, and all of a sudden, that's when Strack's goon starts to uh, of course, Darkman, but eventually this is all to lead to eventually Darkman saving Julie and eventually dropping Strack for him to fall to his death. And Strack is to mention it's like, hey, like killing me, like that's gonna be another thing onto your conscience, and like hey, I'm sure you won't want to do that because you're the good guy. And so all of a sudden Darkman easily drops Strack, and he's like, you know what, I can easily live with a lot of things I found out. Like that I could just deal with just killing people and won't feel a thing. So Julie and Peyton are to go into this elevator, and Peyton is to tell Julie to stop looking at him, and Julie is like, well, like like I want to look. And so Peyton is to mention that really, if he were to ever have the perfect synthetic skin to be able to live a life with Julie for the rest of his life, it seems like there is something more to him than uh, just these scars and just these whatever, that like he is something different. He is something new. I'm heavily paraphrasing as well as the entire movie, basically. So yeah, like we really have to realize that Peyton is probably not going to easily just go back to Julie because he's not the same Peyton. He's not the same guy, and and I know there's quite a few sequels of this movie. I know there's a whole franchise of this, and eventually Liam Neeson doesn't go on and do any other of these films. I think they end up easily replacing him with the guy from the very first Mummy movie, or like they eventually, I think, just replace him consistently. So, yeah, I think that's how this movie really is to end, with basically just like Peyton not going back to his life. He just goes and is to continue to be Darkman and to continue to seek vengeance upon people that have done him wrong. Because eventually, I'm assuming there's going to be so many attachments to this where, like, we'll find out that Darkman, like, there's another kind of like whole like connection somewhere bizarrely to like the people that have been connected to this movie, because that's always how sequels go into, where it's just like, hey, I'm Strack the Third or something like that, or I'm Durant's son or something like that, some goofy thing like that. So with that said, I think I'm going to call it a day. Hopefully you guys like this review. I don't know. It's kind of surprising when eventually I'll do these reviews. I'm like, oh my god, that actually did well. Thank God. Like there's some movies that I really did thoroughly enjoy, and I hope that comes off in the reviews. But yeah, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, everybody.